With enthusiasm, Mr. President. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Mr. President and my colleagues in the circle, putting together a budget is something I think I know something about. I was trained in economics and finance and accounting at the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School, and for 48 years I've been working in the financial world, working on pro forma statements, budgets, cash flow forecasts. And I can tell you that the document that we have put together, that we are talking about tonight, is as good and as serious a detailed budget as I've seen in all that time. I am really, really proud and enthusiastic for the bold proposal that we have put forward. And I do want to thank, and I want to congratulate Senators Formica and Franz, and I want to thank staff member Lisa Hammersley for their enormous work they put into this bold and important document that should form the blueprint of the budget process, which should begin immediately. There is no time to waste. I also want to thank Senator Fasano for his bold leadership of our caucus. He hasn't been afraid to take on a controversial issue loaded with all sorts of potential pitfalls. No, he's done what he thinks is right for the state of Connecticut. There's a Latin expression, carpe diem, seize the day. Senator Fasano, in his leadership of our caucus, truly has seized the day. He hasn't been afraid to shy away from doing what's necessary to save our state. We are only at the beginning of the process of building the state budget. The budget itself is just a document that's the outcome of that process. During the next few months, there will be a lot of give and take, and there should be a lot of give and take as we put the final budget together. In fact, our budget and our proposal is so good and so pragmatic and so reasonable that we've already received input from around the state and have begun to make adjustments reflecting what we thought was legitimate and constructive criticism. A good example was some of the comments about the comp time, the complementary time, and whether the amount that we had put into the budget that we had proposed was reasonable. Our staff got to work right away, looked at that, and said, yeah, maybe we should adjust that. Maybe we should do something that it might be a bit more realistic, recognizing that we do have men and women who work for our state where overtime is necessary and can't necessarily be accommodated for by comp time. So we adjusted the proposed budget already to reflect that and to be much more realistic. The proposed budget has made every effort to balance the budget without raising taxes and without shifting costs.
Senator Suzio, can you stand at ease for one moment?
Sure.
I just want to tell the audience, please don't lean over the gallery up there, and please, you can't film the chamber, okay? So please don't film, and also don't lean over because we're concerned for security. Thank you. Senator Suzio, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I was saying, the proposed budget has made every effort to avoid tax increases and to avoid shifting costs to our cities and towns, as has been proposed by the current administration. And the proposed budget that we're discussing tonight is remarkably successful at doing that. But there is a crucial assumption built into our budget that needs to be addressed, and needs to be addressed as soon as possible. And that relates to the outcome of the CBAC negotiations. Will the necessary savings be achieved or not? In the budget that we developed, we allowed for CBAC savings of about $1.9 billion out of the projected budget deficit of $5 billion. That means that we feel we can balance the budget, the majority of the budget, over $3 billion of the budget deficit, without imposing a burden on the men and women who work for our state and doing a remarkable job doing so. But there's no getting around it. We need the cooperation of the state employees and their willingness to come forward and help us address the budget deficit we have. In fact, I want to make sure that everyone in this circle and in the state of Connecticut realizes we are not in a budget crisis. We're in the middle of a budget catastrophe. We are beyond the crisis stage. We're literally on the verge of a financial meltdown. And until everybody in the state realizes that, we won't treat it with the proper seriousness that it deserves. The proposed CBAC agreement, if I give credit to the estimate given by the governor, would leave us about $348 million short of what we need to balance the budget without raising taxes and without shifting costs to the cities and towns. Is it reasonable? The big question is it reasonable to expect state employees to come forward a bit more than what's in the tentative agreement? Well, let's take a look at perhaps what might be a typical state employee and see what is being asked of them. If we were to look at a state employee who's making $70,000 a year right now, that employee would give up any pay increases for the first 3 years and then would be entitled to a pay increase of 3.5% in years 4 and 5. Not only that, but that employee would be entitled to a bonus in year 3 of either $2,000 or their step plus $1,000. The steps are increments in the pay scales for our state employees. Generally speaking, there's 10, 12, or 13 steps. It can vary depending on the unit and the particular job. But it's another pay increase, basically. And they typically go 2.5% to 3.5%. So in the proposed CBAC deal, the state employees in years 4 and 5 would be getting their step increase plus 3.5%. When you do the computation, an employee who starts out making $70,000 a year, 4 years from now will be making about $80,000 per year. This is in the concession agreement that's been proposed by CBAC. Now, that employee will be contributing more towards their health care. I calculate probably an estimate of about $500 more per year towards health care. And that employee would be contributing more towards their retirement, a couple of percent of their pay. So if you're at $70,000 to $80,000, that is about 2%, about $1,500 to $1,600 a year. But again, the pay increase over that period of time would be about $10,000. So it's not too bad a position to be in. I know that there's some writers who have talked about state employees having to give up $30,000, $40,000, but that is totally an unrealistic way to look at it. The realistic way is to look at what is in the paycheck and what's coming out of their pockets as they go forward in the next 5 years. I think it's important to communicate to the state and to the state employees that we are grateful for their willingness to come forward as they have done in the past and sacrifice for the good of the state. But we are in dire straits. We are not in just an ordinary crisis. We are in a budget meltdown crisis. The wheels are coming off the bus. And if we are to avoid a tax increase, or if we are to avoid shifting the costs that we've incurred to the cities and towns and making them bear the burden, it's imperative that the state employees come forward and are willing to bear their fair share of the cost. And $1.9 billion out of $5 billion deficit, I think that's reasonable, particularly when you look at it in the context of an example like I just articulated. It's imperative that we resolve this budget deficit without tax increases and without shifting the cost to cities and towns. So I am going to enthusiastically support this proposal and vote for it. And I urge all of you in the circle to do so. And remembering that this is the starting point. It's a document that we recognize is going to have to be tweaked and changed over the next few months. But we cannot lose a moment's time. Every month we delay in solving the problem, the hole gets deeper. We cannot continue to let ourselves get into a deeper hole because the pain and the suffering are going to be that much greater. As I began talking, I mentioned about Senator Fasano's bold leadership, and I mean that sincerely. It is my privilege to yield the floor to Senator Fasano. May I do so, Mr. President?